Money. I have it. You might have it. This guy definitely has it. It's the sweet nectar of life, so much so that some people are willing to sell their souls for it by working in a financial company. But not me though. I occasionally make dumb robot videos and made more money than I probably should have. Now, a smart person, they may choose to invest this. Not a bad idea. Personally, I'm interested in Ponzi coin at the moment. It's just on a little bit of a downtrend. Trust me, a random guy on the internet. You donkey! But as you may be able to tell, I am not a particularly smart person, and I'm addicted to building robots in my room. So I'm gonna invest in my... Look, I just want to build a drone. Drones, they're complex little things, and like humans, they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. We've got fat drones, thin drones, and even sin drones. That's the best joke I've ever made on this channel in the 1.5 years I've been doing this. And believe it or not, they all have one thing in common. They can all fly. Flying is something that's quite hard to achieve, or so I've heard. I've never actually made a robot fly, but regardless, I've thrown together a rough plan. Our drone's going to probably need 5 primary components, the first of which is going to be a sort of frame or base that's going to tie the rest of the components together. Now, I should probably do that now, but I'm actually going to leave that to a little bit later and focus on lift. To get something to fly, we need something that can provide enough upwards force or lift to overcome the effect of gravity on that object. Here on Earth, that's a pretty big common problem. So much so that in recent times, extraordinarily rich people have been spending billions upon billions on rockets, which, as you can tell, overcome the effect of gravity pretty effectively sometimes. The reason they're so expensive has a lot to do with energy requirements. Rockets are pretty heavy and need a lot of energy to get themselves up. They get around this by burning jet fuel or kerosene, which for something like SpaceX's Falcon 9 takes 200 grand per flight. I don't have 200 grand sitting around, and if I did, I'd probably buy a house or maybe a shed in this economy. So we need a more reusable solution, and that's where this comes in. It's a motor. I've used motors quite a few times before, and typically they look like this. Wow. They're small and cheap, but spin slower. A lot slower. The difference between these two is that this one is brushed and this one is brushless. It means that there's less friction, less wear, and in short, it just spins a hell of a lot faster, but it's also a hell of a lot more expensive. Oh, brother, this guy stinks! These motors, they have a specific mounting configuration, i.e. they basically just have screw holes in certain places. Now, I could 3D print a frame that matches these holes exactly, but I only have the capacity to print with weak, pathetic polylactic acid because I don't have a proper ventilated setup. This is definitely not my kitchen. And because the motors spin with such a velocity, I suspect they're just gonna rip through that polylactic flame like it's cheese. So, wallet time!
I call it Alibaba intelligence.
I picked up this carbon fiber frame and it's really nice because it's got really low density, but it's also got very high tensile strength, which essentially just means it's strong for what we need it for. Remember when we were talking about rockets? Well, the thing is, no matter how you spin it, to get mass into the air takes a lot of energy. We're getting around this by using motors, but they still need juice. Up until now on this channel, I've only ever used nickel metal hydride batteries, which aren't particularly good at providing that juice, but strap enough together and you have enough to power some small devices. Thing is, to power one of these motors, you would need 4 of these. Not only is that hard to fit into the frame, but it's also really heavy. That last point's like a kick in the gut, because the heavier something is, the more energy it requires to get up into the air, which means we either need more motors or more powerful motors, both of which require more current, which requires more batteries, which means everything gets heavier. This is what I call the infinite drone heavy weight glitch. Don't quote me on that. This is why drones haven't been around that long. Battery tech just wasn't quite there, but no longer. This is a lithium polymer battery. As far as juice is concerned, this battery has the capacity of this many nickel battery packs, but weighs about the same. Sadly, it's not all good news though. For this superior battery, we get a more dangerous chemical composition. That's why I store it in this ammunition box here. When you use them, that means you've got to take care of two really important things. The first is voltage and current regulation, which PCBWAY was kind enough to offer assistance with. The big thing we're trying to solve is ensuring our motors don't pull more current than the battery can handle, otherwise battery go boom. Luckily, one of the services PCBWAY provides is, unsurprisingly, PCB manufacture. So my question is, would it be possible to manufacture a regulatory circuit using that service? The answer is yes, and I know the quality of the produced board would be great because I've used them in the past to manufacture the simple motor driver board that I designed. Given the quality of work they've done in both PCB manufacture and even CNC milling, I highly recommend them. Feel free to check them out. Thing is, this is such a common problem as far as drones are concerned that instead of designing something from scratch, way too hard, I can just spend more money. This is an electronic speed controller, and it does all that voltage and current regulation for us for the low price of 30 bucks. It's also dealing with this second bit, the not explodey battery cell bit. Very catchy, I know. Essentially, this battery, it has cells. Each of these cells has its own voltage it sits at. So right now the cell voltages look like this. This voltage level is known as a storage voltage, and you'll notice despite there being 4 cells, they're all pretty similar. That's really important because say we were to charge up the battery to fly the drone and cell 1 was at 4 volts and cell 2 was at 3.5 volts, they would react with one another. That creates heat, which eventually creates fire. So I'm just gonna put this back in its ammunition box now. So the ESC makes sure it pulls from all of those cells equally when we drive motors, so I don't burn down my rental apartment. Success! I soldered together the ESC, motors, and connected the carbon fiber frame. And by I soldered, I mean my friend soldered, because he's a soldering pro and I'm lazy. Since we want to be able to drive the drone ourselves, we need some sort of brain to send commands, and we'll use this, a flight controller. Think of it like a normal board, but with a lot of built-in sensors that exist for the sole purpose of ensuring the drone doesn't crash and burn. I ordered one that pairs nicely with our ESC, and it's fairly plug and play. Through this integrated app, we can get an idea of just what the FC feels the drone is experiencing. Obviously, this is just fake flight at the moment, but you get the idea. With 4 of the 5 design points covered, the drone is ready to test. So quick explanation, that's me, that's the drone. My solder servant from before is over here, and he's controlling that app from earlier, which allows him to control the motors. So let's get started. Firstly, we're just going to go about testing each of these motors one by one. Obviously, the big thing we need to find out is, does each motor work? But we're also curious if the battery and ESC can meet the demands of those motors. We got no response from motor 2.
The 2 don't seem to be motoring.
Okay. But despite that, we still ran a test for all the motors running simultaneously. It worked pretty well, but ultimately we concluded that the second motor, which is this one here, was busted, and I'd need to order a new one. But I'm a cheapskate, and shipping times are annoying. So before I did that, I disconnected the second motor and switched its position with the first motor on the ESC and ran the test again.
The one, it should be one that's not working. Wow.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. This time it worked perfectly, despite changing nothing but the position of the motor, which in theory shouldn't even matter. But what do I know in the eyes of engineering god? This meant we could start spinning the motors to their max rotational speed.
Wait to see how high we can go?
Go to 1.5. But I hadn't properly tightened the arm of the drone, so it almost flew off. Haha, no pun intended. Actually, it was intended. But with that test completed, it's time to get our control off the app and onto this controller. The app uses Bluetooth, which is great because Bluetooth communicates a lot of information, but bad because Bluetooth's range sucks. In fact, if you were to take my sub count, turn it into millimeters, that's how far the range approximately is. It's not a huge number, but I'm very grateful. Regardless, we need more range. This controller, or in this context, a transmitter, pairs with our receiver. This sends signal over long range, this receive them. Pretty simple, right? Well, we soldered on our receiver to our flight controller.
This one. Yeah, careful.
After searching the interwebs, I found out the issue was likely to do with the arming protocol. Basically, you need to tell your flight controller the transmitter is actually on and it's not just that on switch before the motors are ready to move. In this case, that default was turning this dial, which was totally not and difficult to find out. So now the motors turn and we can even control rotation, stick the propellers on, and boom, we're gonna fly. That means all 5 of our steps are done. Woohoo! Now over the past 10 minutes, have you asked yourself, is it legal to fly an unregistered drone? Well, smart cookie, you're smarter than me. God damn it. Part 2 when I get a residential permit to fly my drone in the country that I live in. Somewhere I will be sad.